My name's Nyesha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Good afternoon, and welcome to another broadcast of AccessTV.org, where you'll be hearing only the undisputed truth. Today we're going to continue our series on redlining and gentrification, and today's guest, our guest, is historian Bill Hosley. Bill Hosley's been a friend of the community, a noted historian, and he's going to give our listening audience a perspective on a little bit of the history of North Hartford and how it was, what it was perceived to be, what it is now, and how we're going to look at it in the future. So, Bill, welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, Charles. Good to be here.
As you know, we've done quite a few of these segments on the subject of redlining and gentrification. In fact, on the I believe it was the 22nd of September, we did a little walk around video, and you were doing sort of like a description of the clock towers. And because of the fact that the filming that we did was live and was a little bit muffled, we thought we'd bring you into the studio so you could pretty much clarify what you were talking about in that little snippet that we showed in one of our shows. I think we showed it on December the 2nd or something like that. Why don't we talk about where you feel is the beacon and the gateway to North Hartford? And why don't we start off with maybe the clock towers as an illustration?
Sure, that's great. You know, a city reveals its truths and its history through the things that you can see. You know, it's like we live in the present, but there's a constant layering of evidence from the past, and you can read things from that. And I first got interested in North Hartford when I was an exhibit developer at Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford, and got involved in the 1980s in a $1 million restoration of the ancient burying ground, which is right across the street from the Wadsworth Atheneum. It's down next to Center Church, and I was always interested in history and cemeteries and gravestones because they tell us a lot about history. And so it didn't take long before I started poking around in the North End and was blown away by Old North Cemetery, how much there was there. And I started looking around this, you know, relatively poor neighborhood, a place that doesn't usually command the kind of respect and attention that it could. And I was just fascinated by everything I found. And the clock tower itself, which you mentioned, is located, you know, just to look at that site, you've got these major roads, the major road to Albany Avenue, Main Street, High Street, Ann Street. They all converge right there, and wow. That is one of the...
Why don't we show that map that we saw a little earlier?
Yeah.
There we are.
So you can see that this was and still is a very prominent gateway to the entrance of the city. And the way it's arranged and the presence of the clock tower right there tells you that at some time in the past, the powers that be, City Hall, the business community, the philanthropists, regarded that as an extremely important place, a place that would be an economic hub, a transportation hub, and a source of civic pride. And, you know, the clock tower itself is kind of an amazing thing because it was built in 1898, and Henry and Walter Keaney...
Why don't we look at another illustration of that clock tower?
Henry and Walter Keaney were business, tycoons. They made a lot of money, and they became benefactors Keaney Park, of course, is the most famous thing. And when you look
Henry
at
Keaney, yeah,
that's
that gentleman's brother, right?
well, no, the two of them, but did both. I think Henry
No.
and Walter. Maybe Henry was more Keaney Park, but the two of them actually built this clock tower there deliberately because of the importance of the location as a memorial to their mother, which is very precious. You know, that's like they had some serious money, and it's got these Carolyn bells. That I mean, it's got, it's just a beautiful landmark, and it's based on a 14th century French cathedral. So it's an architectural. It's one of the prides of Hartford, and a beautiful thing. And you look at that, and then you sort of look around and you say, well, they knocked down all these buildings around it. It's no longer residential particularly, and there are parking lots, and you've got the Capitol Prep next door, pretty close. But you have to
And don't forget now, Dunkin' Donut Park.
Dunkin' Donut
Don't
Park.
forget
There we
that.
go.
Boy,
So there you go.
That just turned out the real.
We're moving on up now.
The real beacon of the 21st century
There
in
we
North
go.
Hartford. Boy.
Yeah, but
Boy,
it's a beautiful, fascinating place. And then in the late 1990s, I was the director of the Connecticut Landmarks organization, which has a group of historic properties all over the state of Connecticut. New London, Nathan Hale's house, and out in Litchfield County, and the Butler McCook house in Hartford. One of their properties is the Isum Terry house. Now, I'd been in that house before, but I was, and if you could call up a picture of that, Stan, I was kind of blown away by it. I mean, the Isum.
That's it there.
Yeah, the
still,
Isum
still standing, right?
Still standing, right on.
What is that? Walnut and High.
Walnut and High.
High Street. Yep.
And if you were a good baseball player, you could throw a snowball from the front yard of that house, and it would land on the Keaney clock tower. They're that close together.
Really? Okay.
So you get a sense, and that
Boy, they
house
had a good arm.
was. There's kind of an amazing story. I mean, look, Mark Twain and Harriet Beecher Stowe are much more famous, but I prefer this house to any other as a museum in Hartford because it's loaded with
Let's look at the
local-
interior. Can we see the interior of that? Oh, that's
It's
so
pretty
beautiful.
breathtaking.
Oh, man.
And
Oh,
everything in that house belonged to the family. It's not a restoration. It's not something some curator figured out. This is how that family lived, and it's all their possessions, and it's loaded with what I call Hartfordisms, things that reflect the family's connectivity to that neighborhood, which they cherished. I mean, the daughters went to Hartford High. Back in their time, in the 1900, you could walk. That's Charlotte Isham. You could walk from that house to Hartford High School.
Yeah, and Barnett Brown.
Yeah, and right, and that high school was the crown jewel of Hartford education. I mean, they sent it was just a magnificent school.
My mom went there, yeah.
So the doctor, their brother, Dr. Isham, had his medical office there. That's him.
Oh, okay.
And he was a neighborhood doctor. And so what was the neighborhood? It was what you call Clay Arsenal,
Clay Hill.
Clay Hill, the old North neighborhood, right that we're talking about there. And his patients were people who lived there. Now, if you go back to 1910, you say, well, who lived there? There were African Americans there, of course, and there were Irish and Italians, and a lot of people, Jewish people who lived there, and it was the center of the Jewish community at the time, and it was almost like Brooklyn, New York, and being extremely diverse, and if you
boiler pot, baby.
Yeah, the
boiler pot of the ethnicity of our world.
The boiling pot, and if you talk to old timers, and there are still some around who remember the 50s and 60s there, they'll say,
well, that'll be us, Bill.
Well, yeah, but the people who lived there, they got along. There was a fair degree of racial harmony, and the Jewish educators were masters. They created one of the most successful multicultural curriculums in the country. And what they specialized in, Charles, was helping immigrants who had English as a second language transition themselves into American citizens and to be successful in their new adopted country. And like half the residents of that neighborhood 100 years ago had English as a second language. Well, there are a lot of people for whom that is still true there.
Yeah, right.
But it was a fascinating place. And your interest in the subject of redlining, the amazing, and however you want to interpret it, people, it's hard to believe that as recently as the 1960s, Jews couldn't live in West Hartford. I mean, maybe there were some exceptions, but the Jewish community was redlined out of West Hartford. So they remained in that neighborhood. And the minute the redlining stopped, the minute the Jews could leave, many of them did, and many things, urban renewal, the exodus to the suburbs, a lot of things changed that neighborhood after 1965. So that by 1980, it was poor. It was sort of hollowed out economically.
Mm-hmm.
The jobs left, the industries left, and the people with money left, including African American people with money who left.
Yes.
And so where are we now? We've got a place that still matters. And, you know, you and I talk about this a lot. For me, history, local history, is a gateway to inclusion. Once you know the story of the place you live, you have a quality of attachment and connectivity to that place that is empowering. And I think that what we've got there, this is Hartford's most historic neighborhood, and what we've got there is a gold mine. And the Keaney Clock Tower and the Isum House and the graveyards, it's not just about tourism, though it could certainly be about that. It's also about civic pride.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting you would say that. They had this project called the I Quilt Project. I don't know if you're familiar with
sure.
that. Some kind of privately funded project. And you know, as you know, when we found out about this organization, we were asking, well, why wasn't the Isum Terry House, the Clock Towers, and Old North Cemetery included in this I Quilts planning? And you know what they told us? Well, these folks can spend their money the way they want. And so that's part of the exclusion. It's kind of like a little redlining.
Yeah,
type
it's
of
a
thing.
kind
You
of
know,
cultural
it's
redlining.
Like, because, you know, once you sit here in a very poor neighborhood and you wait for public funding, sometimes it really never comes.
Sometimes?
Well, they you know, a few people have gotten a few dollars here and there, public monies. But it's so important that we teach our you know, people who feel that they're economically strained or whatever
or marginalized.
Marginalized, to be their own entrepreneurs. I mean, like, as you know, let's take, for example, Tunnel Park, which used to be called Bums Park. Now, just imagine if it was Bums Park now and people were able to hang out there. Do you know how many empty cans and bottles would be on that property that they could just take those cans and bottles to a redemption center, and they could probably make a career out of that, because recycling is something that's pretty big these days. But my point is that everybody matters, and everybody can be an entrepreneur if they really set it in their minds and, you know, get a little training along the way, instead of waiting for these handouts that probably will never come.
That never come. Well, I couldn't agree more, and I think one of the things that I always like to say is that you know, you can't really love another person if you don't know them. I mean, that's obvious. You know, to be in a loving relationship with anything, whether it's another person, with God, or with your neighborhood, you have to know about it. And that knowledge, that this history could be a springboard for giving people a stronger, more confident sense of civic pride and local pride and community pride, so that to help young people and people of all ages appreciate that place matters. It helps to share the news and to share some of these stories. And I if I had a magic wand, Capital Prep, Sand School, the schools there would use some of these.
Hopkins Library.
Hopkins Branch, Hartford Public Library would embrace all these wonderful treasures, because I don't think the acknowledgement and the appreciation and the respect is going to come from the iQuilt and from the usual sources on
Well, it's
high.
not going to come from City Hall. That's
It's not going to, probably not.
Well,
At least it hasn't yet.
Interesting thing that you said, and we're kind of embracing this concept of intergenerational relationships, where the seniors can learn from the youth, and the youth can learn from the seniors.
Love that.
We're doing a pilot program this summer. It took us like 8 years to get it going, but we are starting an intergenerational program up right here in the Clay Hill neighborhood. The focal point will be Faith Manor, which is an elderly housing complex, along with the YMCA that's located there, the Wilson Gray YMCA, the local playground, and that neighborhood there. And we're trying to get the youth and the seniors to start, working together. And of course, we'll get the middle-aged people in there, sort of like a community congress we're trying to develop, so that people like yourself, we do consider ourselves the elders in a sense. We can be described as senior citizens. I mean, like, for example, Old North Cemetery, we've been thinking about doing tours and things of that nature, and you've embraced one of the sisters that, in fact, had this program, Evelyn Richardson. I know you,
Sure.
and you know her son.
Yeah.
And he's kind of like gravitating toward being a tour guide and things of that nature. And he's probably pretty much been under your wing, short amount of time. But this just illustrates the potential of people in the neighborhood, grabbing professions and being able to earn their own paycheck and.
Well, yeah, and again, that bubbling up of civic pride. The idea of being a tour guide, nobody's going to get rich doing that, but it's a life skill. When you have to stand up before a group and engage them and tell stories and lead them on an experience.
It has to be the undisputed truth, too, because, people go back and do research on you.
Oh,
Say, is
well,
this guy
that's-
really
yeah.
credible? Is he credible or what?
Well, the training matters,
Right.
obviously. And when we started this, we had a youth program. They still have it at the Ancient Burying Ground. And we had a youth training program at the Ancient Burying Ground on Main Street that assured that every, that's Old North Cemetery right there, but that assured that the young people that were giving tours there actually knew what was there and had the skills and the training to be effective at the job of being a tour guide. And so, and I think that, look, Hartford has an abundance of cultural riches and art, and we've got these national treasures like the Wadsworth Athenaeum and the Bushnell and lots of good stuff. That's one of the things Hartford has to be proud of. But a lot of that great stuff is in this poorest neighborhood, and you and I have talked about this a lot. It's never gotten the respect or the attention it deserves, and thanks to you in part. I mean, I think we had the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving was very interested and pledged some money to help kickstart these educational programs around Old North, and we are still working on finding a partner, a nonprofit partner that we can work with. I feel it's very important that partner be based in the neighborhood and have roots there. So that's what we're working on, and I think we're going to get there. But it's ultimately, it's the empowerment of seeing people come into the neighborhood, or seeing your own family and friends in the neighborhood discover something that is newsworthy and worthy of respect. And some people say, well, all right, the neighborhood is predominantly African American. Who cares about all those dead white males? And
Interesting dynamic, but go ahead.
Yeah, interesting dynamic. And my response to that is, number one, these are great stories and they are true. Number two, it's not just dead white males. Old North Cemetery
The most diverse
is the most diverse historic site in the city.
cemetery.
Catholics, Jews, Protestants, and the largest concentration of black Civil War vets in the entire state of Connecticut.
And not only the state of Connecticut, but probably in the United States.
Well, it's
But isn't it an irony that all these famous people that were the head of the universe in the early 1900s, the late 1800s and up, are buried in the one of the poorest historical
it's amazing.
neighborhoods in the country? I mean, like, how do you get to this point?
They're more famous and important, and I hate to, celebrity is overrated. I mean, it's great. Look,
look. Bushnell Park.
Horace Bushnell is buried
he's
there.
buried there, right?
And
how many governors would you say are buried there?
I think there are three.
Okay. Three.
Yeah, and there are mayors and congressmen and
I think the founder of the School of the Deaf.
Yes,
I think they're buried there as well,
yes,
right?
Yep.
Okay,
Founder of the Wadsworth Athenaeum, founder of the Connecticut Historical Society. There's so many, and I love taking people through that site because it's such a magnificent teaching tool. I mean, you go from artifact, from stone to stone. We don't, you can't look at everything, but in a typical tour, we'll single out 15 or 20 monuments to go to and talk about. You've got Sam Colt, the founder of the Republican Party in the state of Connecticut, Democratic governors, the lawyer for Prudence Crandall, and who was the governor at the time of the Amistad event. I mean, there's just so many of these extraordinary stories, and I just love. I think people should know that stuff, and to know it and to experience it. Yeah, it makes you kind of proud. You think, gee, this is a beautiful thing. And let's also remember that the city of Hartford, City Hall, did invest unprecedented amounts of money in the
just recently. Just recently, in the last administration,
Yeah,
but unfortunately, with the debt that this present mayor has been faced with, all the capital improvement monies have pretty much dried up for us to continue, our project in Old North, as you know, and that's why it's so important that we look to the private sector to see if we can fund some of these projects that mean a lot to me and you personally. It means a lot. Old North means a lot to me personally because that's my mom's brainchild. I mean, like in 1985, when I was a community organizer with the organization Change, she brought me over there where my grandparents and my great-grandparents are buried. The place was in deplorable condition, and she looks at me and says, "Charles, you oversee this neighborhood. What are you going to do about the conditions here?" Now, that was in 1985.
So if your great-grandparents are there, they were probably the first generation of African Americans.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yes,
yeah.
In Hartford.
Yeah, my grandparents and great grandparents are native Hartfordites. They didn't come from down south or either. They were born and raised here. My grandfather, he was a 33rd degree Mason, the highest Mason you could ever get in the universe. He owned 3 properties in that particular neighborhood: Pliny Street, Brook Street, Winter Street. I grew up on Brook Street. We left and moved up to Northwest Hartford. I came back in the early part of the 70s and moved back into my grandparents' house on Pliny Street. So there's a little history that goes along with it.
Well, and most people probably don't know this, but there have been black people in Hartford since the 1600s.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it was always a very small population until around World War I, and then that whole field to factory thing that they talk about, the big migration, most people of African descent, most black people in Hartford today, if they have parents or grandparents that lived here, were descendants of that field to factory migration.
Exactly. Right.
So, but it's, that's history too, of course, and it's important history. And the beauty of this stuff is you can bring it right up to now. I mean, you don't have to look back 150 years to tap into the wonderful, kind of inspirational power of community knowledge. And I think the point you made about intergenerational is terribly important. I think that for young people, it's hard for guys our age to believe this, but young people don't know about civil rights unless they're taught it. They didn't go through it. They don't
know racism if it slaps them in the face. They don't know what gentrification is all about. They don't know about the history of politics,
so even
the history of religion.
Even fairly
they don't know their history.
Yeah, they don't know their history. And one of my talking points always is that people think history, if you've taken a class in history in school and you learn about presidents and politicians and wars and generals, and it always seems kind of remote. And that's one kind of history. But local history is this powerful thing. It's like, what is Hartford's story? What happened here? And when you discover that history was made in your own neighborhood, and that it's not trivial, that it's important, that's enriching.
Let me just say this. In the interest of time, we got about 5 minutes left. And I always ask my guests that come onto the show, where do we go from here? We know, the systemic problems that have plagued urban communities like Clay Hill and others. Of course, as you know, this is a national research project I'm involved in. And talking to my colleagues across the country, this is part of the fabric of America. Redlining and now gentrification is like first and foremost, on the agenda. Where do we go from here, Bill? I've asked Professor Jack Dowdy, who did the study, How Housing, Schooling, and Civil Rights Shape Harvard in the Suburbs. My guest on my last show was Dr. Al DiCicciera, a criminologist from the University of Hartford. You as a historian, where do we go from here? How do we get everybody to embrace the concept of the society that we all live in is a society for everyone, whether you be blue, green, pink with purple polka dots or whatever. Everybody matters. From your professional perspective as a historian, where do you think we can get a good kickstart from here? The 17th of August of 2016. What do we go from here, Bill?
Well, I think that many of the challenges Hartford faces have to do with job loss and an economy that is not just in one neighborhood but in the region. Greater Hartford is still relatively prosperous compared to many places, but that the wealth is segregated, and we have other challenges in terms of the kind of school systems we have, the kind of opportunities people have. But to me, the thing that I know best, which has to do with culture and history and civic pride, is what can we do through that to reverse the demoralizing effect of living in a decaying place, a place that feels like it's been abandoned and neglected by money power. And it's that sense of local pride and respect is something that we can make change, and we can move the needle a little bit on that. And we can do it through education, and we can do it through programming and publicity. Beyond that, looking forward 20 years, I asked another colleague this morning, where do you see this neighborhood in 20 years or even 10 years? Patrick Pinnell is an architect and planner and a longtime friend, and we were talking about this. And he says, look, there's so much was bulldozed and torn down. There's so many parking lots around the clock tower that there's a lot of infill. If the development of that area is done correctly, and if the developers do more than pretend to care about the people who live there and the resources that we're talking about, then we can build some connectivity that will be mutually beneficial. And it's not gentrification because it's not replacing anything. It's supplementing and adding. And I don't think, I would like to think, it's all big mystery where Hartford goes, because the economic residential base of the city has been pretty flatlined for a long time. But there has been a migration of some younger people into the cities. And as my friend Patrick said, he said, look, you look on Windsor Avenue, particularly Albany Avenue, there are so many opportunities for entrepreneurs to, if they want to build a business, it's a good place to do it because the real estate is affordable.
That's true. That's true. And there's something that I've been hearing in the news. I don't watch too much news or anything, but this new mayor that the city of Hartford has is now talking about something that I never thought I would hear politicians talk about, and that's regionalism. Boy, if you mentioned that terminology, regionalism, 30 or 40 years ago, that wasn't a good subject, but now it seems to be coming on the table now.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, you think regionalism would be something that would be a good infusion to helping communities like North Hartford and others, or
yeah, I think
what do you think? Now regionalism could be like a bailout type of project, and and then you have everybody else coming in and taking control. What do you think about?
Well,
that?
regionalism is controversial because I think some people in the suburbs, Connecticut is 169 towns, and
with their own zoning boards of appeals,
and it's odd in a way. We don't have counties, and we do have like the Capital Region Educational Council, CREC, and the CROG, and there are these regional mechanisms and things. The MDC, things that get done, the Metropolitan District Commission that manages water. There are these structures that facilitate cooperation between towns. But there aren't that many of them, and it is always a challenge, and many of the towns jealously guard their resources. And I think people sometimes say, gee, it's, they spent $700 million on Adrian's Landing in Hartford. When is enough enough? But look, I'm all in favor of it. I think the whole metro region of Hartford will be stronger to the degree that the hub, which is the city of Hartford, is respected and careful in managing its resources and respectful of one another. And I think education and, frankly, a sense of the importance of this history is part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Okay, well, that's a very good note to end on, and I'm pretty sure that there will be more dialogue about these and other subjects. We thank you for being here with us today. You're a good friend of the community, and we look forward to maybe seeing some illustrations of the byproducts of the not so bright of beacon of light that the clock towers symbolized back in the 1800s. But we always remain cautiously optimistic that things will get better for you, yours, and ours.
Well, and that clock tower, it sings, its bells light up the world, and it keeps hope alive. And thank you for caring.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, bye.
We want to thank our listening audience for tuning in again for another broadcast of accesstv.org, where you will always hear the undisputed truth. We'll see you the next time.
My name is J. Stan McCauley, and I do business as Light Source Productions. I provide professional services in the area of strategic video communications. First, what we do is we help you craft your message using what I call the rule of the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. We do event documentation, content acquisition, full-scale productions, editing, and of course distribution through our social media television network. And with social media, video is more important now than it has ever been. Whether you're talking big business, small business, nonprofit, church, or just an individual. Let's say you plan you're planning an event, a wedding, whatever the case may be. But let's say a big event, but no video. And you spent all this time, all these hours to put this event on, and maybe 100, 200 people attend the event. But more important than that is that thousands could attend by watching it on social media. But of course, you don't think about this until after the event is over. You can't afford not to capture it for social media. And despite what people think, I am affordable. Give me a call. Let's plan your next video project and share it with the world on my social media television network. I promise you that you will have the attention of one person, me.